Hi everyone, I'm Violet, and this is my screencast for Steinberg's Chapter 8 on identity. So changes in identity occur continuously throughout our life cycle. So why are researchers so focused on adolescence? There are two answers to this question. The first reason is that during adolescence, there are fundamental changes in our biology, cognition, and social roles that are key factors in the development of our mature identity. The second reason is that the changes that occur during adolescence involve the first ever restructuring of our sense of selves into an organized system, and this is the first time in our lives that we have the intellectual ability to understand and appreciate these changes. So during puberty, adolescents physically change so much on the outside that it is noticeable. In turn, adolescents start to question if anything is changing on the inside too. During adolescence, our intellectual abilities expand, which allow us to think about ourselves in new ways, the same way that we start to think differently about all of our relationships and our values. There are two ways that identity develops in terms of cognition during adolescence. First, adolescents are better able to imagine their positive selves, which are various identities that an adolescent imagines for themselves. Next, adolescents are able to picture their future orientation, which is the extent to which an individual thinks about potential consequences of their actions. This might include the infamous question, where do you see yourself in 10 years? So pre-adolescents are unable to imagine their future orientation because they tend to think concretely and cannot think abstractly enough to imagine becoming a different person. During adolescence, the brain thinks very differently than it did during pre-adolescence. Brain imaging studies found that patterns of brain activity differed between adolescents, pre-adolescents, and adults during tasks in which individuals were asked to think about themselves. Changes in certain social aspects can also affect identity development, as we can view identity through changes in the way we view ourselves in relations to others and society. So researchers have taken three approaches to understand identity development from a social aspect. The first is a change in self-conception. Self-conception is a collection of traits and attributes that individuals see in themselves. The second is self-esteem, which is how positively or negatively we feel about ourselves. The third is a change in sense of identity, which is who you are, where you come from, and where you're going. Changes in self-conception include the differentiation of the self-concept, which is the realization that one's personality is expressed in different ways depending on the situation. This allows for adolescents to distinguish between their own opinions of themselves and the way that others view them. Adolescents are also able to highly organize statements referring to their identities, which allow them to distinguish between their true self, ideal self, and their feared self. Adolescents develop an attribute called the false self behavior. This is any behavior that intentionally presents a false impression to others. This could be like trying to impress a future boyfriend or girlfriend, or even new friends. This is most commonly found in individuals who report low emotional support from their parents, low self-esteem, and depression. I highlighted low self-esteem on the slide because false self-behavior and low self-esteem have a really interesting relationship. Some people who engage in this type of behavior have low self-esteem initially, so they put on a false self. However, other people end up developing low self-esteem because they are knowingly putting on a false self. So Steinberg describes three aspects of self-image. The first aspect is self-consciousness, which is how much one worries about their self-image. The second is self-image stability, which is how much one's self-image changes from day to day. And the third is self-esteem, which is how positively or negatively someone feels about themselves. Self-esteem becomes increasingly more stable from childhood to adulthood. Fluctuations in self-esteem are most likely to occur between the ages of 12 and 14, which can be seen on this graph. We see that the steepest slope occurs between 7th to 8th grade. The reason behind this is because adolescence is the first time of a major change in the brain system that is involved in regulating how we think about ourselves and others. Early adolescent girls are the most vulnerable to disturbances in their self-image. The reasons for this are that they have lower self-esteem, a higher degree of self-consciousness, and a shakier self-image than boys. While reading about this, I remembered some discussions we had in the last module and the conversation about imaginary audience. We discussed the idea that adolescent girls seem to have a stronger imaginary audience than boys do, and I think that these reasons can apply to that conversation as well. Something that I found interesting is that these sex differences are most pronounced in white adolescents. There's a similar pattern in Hispanic adolescents, but it was mostly not found among Black adolescents. So Black adolescents have, on average, higher self-esteem than white adolescents do, and white adolescents tend to have higher self-esteem than Hispanic, Asian, and Native American youths. Researchers have asked why Black adolescents have higher self-esteem than other ethnicities, given the prejudice that exists in American society and the general disadvantaged position of Black individuals in school and the workplace. Two answers were found to this question. The first explanation is that Black teenagers more often benefit from the support and positive feedback from peers and adults in the Black community. The second explanation is the strong sense of ethnic identity that exists among Black adolescents. Problems in identity development can result when someone has not successfully resolved past crises. There are three types of problems in identity development. The first is identity diffusion, which is an incoherent, disjointed, incomplete sense of self. This is marked by disruptions in the individual's sense of time and excessive self-consciousness. The next type of problem is identity foreclosure, which is a premature establishment of a sense of identity before sufficient role experimentation has occurred. This interruption of the identity development process interferes with the discovery of an individual's full potential. Finally, the last problem is a negative identity. This is when an individual selects an identity that is obviously undesirable in the eyes of a significant other or the broader community. This problem appears to be likely when, after repeatedly trying and failing to receive positive recognition, adolescents will turn to a different, less beneficial route of getting noticed. An example of this would be a child of a lawyer getting into constant legal trouble. So studies have shown that a coherent sense of identity is not established before the age of 18, let alone earlier in adolescence, which has been extensively theorized. This is especially true among boys, who tend to lag behind girls in identity development. Furthermore, achieving a sense of identity in adolescence is not a final state, but a stepping stone towards the establishment of a mature sense of self. These are my references. Thank you so much.